The financial piece, Michael Finca, who is a professor of financial planning and is a longtime researcher in this space, was someone I knew I wanted to bring into the book because he is just so well versed in the financial aspects of retirement, but he's also done a lot of work on what makes people happy in retirement. He's got some surprising conclusions. So one thing that doesn't make people particularly happy, surprisingly, is living near their kids. And it may be because they're sometimes called in to be kind of surrogate babysitters, whatever the case might be. People often retire and they're really burned out. And so they don't really make a plan to do anything besides just relax. And one point he makes in the book is that relaxation is good. You should come into retirement with kind of a bucket list of relaxation activities, but you need something to relax from. Yeah, it's something that you want to invest in well before retirement hits. In fact, I would say that that's a key takeaway from the book is just that you don't want to wait until you are on the doorstep of retirement before you start thinking through certainly the financial ramifications, but also building healthy habits in terms of your physical health and your mental health. It's ideal to start laying the groundwork for healthy habits well before you're in your 60s. And she does a lot of work on relationships because a lot of the research that's been done on human happiness, on life satisfaction, does center around relationships. And to the extent that we feel loved and that we love other people, it's just so essential to our sense of well-being. Be acute for people who are embarking on retirement where they think, okay, I've got this new chapter, I've got more time, I should do something really big. And so, they might think I should write a book or I should start a foundation or, something really bold and audacious. And his point is that gives people a sense of panic because they're like, I'm not sure I've got the right purpose. And so he makes this really reassuring point that we should be okay with what he calls small p purpose. And basically that's, maybe it's the hobby that you loved as a kid that you had to kind of set aside because you got busy with other activities. Or maybe it's just being a wonderful grandparent or a wonderful partner to your spouse, that you're super committed to hiking or whatever. Like nothing really bold and audacious, but just something that yes, this is a thing that I'm about and this helps define me. And this is something that gives me a sense of that I'm making an impact.
Welcome to your journey to find true tranquility with the Tranquility Magazine podcast with your host, Jasmine Maya Royce. Today's episode featuring, you can find more information about Tranquility on our website, tranquilitymagazine.com.
Christine Benz is the Director of Personal Finance and Retirement Planning for the Morningstar and a senior columnist for Morningstar.com. She is also the co-host of a podcast for Morningstar, The Long View. She has been widely quoted in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, CNBC, and PBS. Barron's named her on its list of 100 most influential women in business in 2020 and 2021. Christine is an author of 30-Minute Money Solutions, a step-by-step guide to managing your finances, co-author of Morningstar Guide to Mutual Funds, 5-Star Strategies for Success, and her new book, How to Retire, 20 Lessons for a Happy, Successful, and Wealthy Retirement. Thank you very much, Christine, for being here. I'm excited for this interview. I always start with my first question. What is your current mantra or your state of mind?
So I always think of something, I actually saw it on a fortune cookie probably 20 years ago, but I always had it taped to my bulletin board at work. And it was listen to the quiet voice within. And the basic idea there is that, kind of the answers that you're looking at, the path you should pursue is probably there inside you. So trust yourself and that'll take you where you need to go. So on an ongoing basis, I've found that to be an incredibly helpful mantra.
It is a very insightful one in a way that it's like trusting your gut and your intuition and then slowing down before making decisions, especially in a field that you're in that has a lot of moving parts. Can you explain a little bit what drew you to working in Morningstar and finance or that direction in your life?
So I've always been kind of a writer, communicator type person, and that was really my entry point at Morningstar. I really did not know about financial matters when I started at Morningstar. In fact, I remember the night before my first interview, my husband was like, "Okay, so you know what a mutual fund is?" And I was like, so that was 30 plus years ago. And Morningstar is a really great firm in that it trains all of its employees on the substance of investing. And so it doesn't really matter what you do at Morningstar, you get some training in investing. And as I went along, I realized that I really enjoyed it. And I also realized I like the personal aspect of what we do and that we can help people make more informed decisions. And when people are feeling comfortable about their finances, it affects so many other aspects of their lives positively. I think I've developed an appreciation for just how important it is in terms of mental health, physical health, your whole sense of well-being. Much of it revolves around your sense of financial security. So I have come to really appreciate the impact in coaching people in improving their financial lives.
Yeah, I think it's a very important understanding that you just pulled from the seeming understanding of your mental and the finance, an aspect, because reformatting the idea of money being a tool rather than striving and trying to achieve and gather it so fast that it's the struggle of survival kind of concept. But kind of reformatting it is a great idea and a wise way of looking at it. But what drew you now after a couple books that you are leaning into retirement factor? What in your personal journey has kind of directed you that way?
Well, a little bit of me search there. Obviously, I've been doing this for a number of years and starting to think realistically about retirement. And so I've begun toiling in this space, writing a lot about retirement related portfolio matters, having helped my parents through their own retirement journey and my mother and father in law somewhat as well. I just have realized how complicated it is relative to the accumulation period that with retirement accumulation, yes, we have many people in our society who do not have adequate savings, but there are some guardrails there for workers in that if they are working in the context of an employer where they have a plan, a retirement plan, often they're defaulted into it. They're often defaulted into a target date fund, which is a pretty reasonable way to save for retirement. When people hit retirement, that's where we send everybody out on their own and
Mm.
they're not necessarily well equipped to make a very complex set of decisions about how to manage their financial affairs. So things like when to claim Social Security, how to determine how much they can reasonably take out of their portfolios once they are in retirement. All sorts of financial considerations are really difficult problems. So it's just kind of interesting to talk about. And I also feel like people really need the help. So that's one reason why I'd like to focus there. And then in terms of the non financial piece, that's something that is driven by my own me search, where I feel like I have the financial piece covered in my household. My husband and I have been lucky to be employed throughout our careers. We've been good savers, so we're not really worried about the financial piece, but I'm sort of worried about maximizing my time on earth allocation, that I have these years, later years of my life, and I just want to make sure that I'm using them as wisely as I possibly can. So I think people need help with both sides of the ledger, the financial as well as the non-financial.
Yeah, it's true. Like you pulled some hinting moments, especially depending on where you are in your journey, but also dealing with your parental factor. And you mentioned that your parents have been a good tutelage for you to have those experiences, but most of us like that concept of a book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is more relevant that you don't really you're not navigating that course because of the directions that parents gave you and you were gifted with that idea. But right now, sometimes it's retirement factors for someone else in your family and also yourself that switches the gears. And you mentioned a little bit about, a direction that when you were inclined to start writing about retirement, who were the two resources that you really wanted to speak to initially out of the gate with exploring this journey?
Yeah, so a few different people, a lot of the people in or all of the people in my book are among my favorite retirement researchers, but I had some beyond the ones who are in the book as well. There are valuable retirement resources all over the place. In terms of the financial piece, Michael Finca, who is a professor of financial planning and is a longtime researcher in this space, was someone I knew I wanted to bring into the book because he is just so well versed in the financial aspects of retirement, but he's also done a lot of work on what makes people happy in
Mm.
retirement. In fact, the first time I saw him present, he was presenting his research on what tends to make people happy. And he's got some surprising conclusions. So, one thing that doesn't make people particularly happy, surprisingly, is living near their kids. And it may be because they're sometimes called in to be kind of surrogate babysitters, whatever the case might be. That relationship isn't always as satisfactory as it seems like it would be. So that he has some counterintuitive findings like that. And one big conclusion he has is that people often retire and they're really burned out. And so they don't really make a plan to do anything besides just relax. And one point he makes in the book is that relaxation is good. You should come into retirement with a kind of a bucket list of relaxation activities, but you need something to relax from. You
Mm.
need a sense of purpose, some sort of animating force for your days. So we discussed all of that in the book. And then another person who I wanted to talk to was Laura Karstensen at Stanford. She is the head of the Stanford Center on Longevity. And some of my favorite conversations I've had in my work have been with her. And she does a lot of work on relationships because a lot of the research that's been done on human happiness, on life satisfaction, does center around relationships. And to the extent that we feel loved and that we love other people. It's just so essential to our sense of well-being. So we discuss all of the different dimensions of that in the book. And she makes the point that our social networks actually winnow down a little bit as we age, but that's also okay because some of that is self-selection, that we're actually choosing to spend time with people who really light us up versus having many, many different relationships, some of which perhaps aren't as meaningful for us. So those are just two of many important discussions that I think we had in the book.
Yeah, I mean, there's a myriad of selections that are really influential in certain ways. And then I love the fact that you mentioned about relationships. I want to pull off of that idea in the aspect of you have spoken before on this that your communication with your husband has been open and transparent. How have you worked to evolve that to have that consistent communication about finances and, retirement or investments, so to speak?
Yeah, I will say we've always been pretty well aligned. And one thing I chalk it up to is just the fact that we got married fairly young. And
Mhm.
so there was not really like his and hers as we joined together as a married couple. It was like we didn't have anything and we had help from our parents, but it made it very easy as things got better for us as we went along in our careers and we became, more financially comfortable. It was all ours. And
Mhm.
so that made things fairly easy. It's also helped a lot that my husband does not work in the investment field, so he has really delegated a lot of our decision making to me. And so that has helped too, that we haven't had two cooks in the kitchen in terms of sorting out what we do with our financial plan. And I will also say that we have been happy consumers of financial advice. So we have hired a financial planner to help us with a couple of aspects of our financial life. And we love her. We trust her. She gets us. And I would say that even for people who are fairly steeped in these matters, you probably have some blind spots, some things where you need a second opinion. So for me, she generally is comfortable with the way I think about our investment portfolio. I tend to be pretty plain vanilla and hands off. But she has other ideas on like tax matters, for example, things that I don't have as much time to devote to, where she has been super additive to our relationship. So that's been helpful too, that we have this third party who we trust who kind of provides an objective set of eyes on our plan.
It's always important to kind of have a third party for, gaining knowledge, understanding the current market, the changes, the demographic for stocks and then investments and what's worth the assets to invest in. But also it is harder for people to find these, amazing people if they don't work in your field. What are suggestions that you have for people looking for a financial advisor?
Yeah, people have no idea what to look for. I run into this all the time, and I blame the financial advice industry because they make it so complicated and there's so many different designations, so many different things that financial advisors call themselves. So I'm generally pretty firmly on team financial planner. I feel like that's the type of advice that most people need. It's kind of the baseline advice in that it's very holistic, where yes, they'll touch your investment portfolio, but they'll also help you with taxes. They'll help you determine whether you need an estate plan. You probably do, and sort of where to go for that. So I would look for a financial planner as kind of a starting point and look for someone using that term. To me, it's very telling if someone's calling themselves a financial planner. Look for someone who has the CFP credential, the certified financial planner credential. Look for someone who's a fiduciary where there is no equivocation about whether or not they're a fiduciary. And then my bias is toward fee only advice where you are not working with anyone who's earning commission sales, from putting you in any specific product type. And that helps ensure objectivity. So I would look for those three things. And a resource that I would point people to for that is a website called NAPFA, NAPFA. It's the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors, napfa.org.
Mhm.
And I really love the planners who are under the NAPFA umbrella because they tick all three of those boxes. They're fiduciaries, they're CFPs, and they're field.
Yeah, it's a great resource to understand finding them because mostly it's either Google people searching or you're just asking for your, economic environment, your friends and relatives that have set that up. And also you made a very solid plan on estate planning. You want to explain a little bit about estate planning in the retirement aspect and also what it is for people to understand what the benefit of having one is.
Yeah, an estate plan is valuable really throughout your life. So, a starting point for a lot of people is when they're making beneficiary designations on your investment accounts. Well, that is a form of an estate plan. In fact, it's an important component of an estate plan where you're naming people who will inherit those assets from you if something should happen to you. So, that's the very foundation of an estate plan. And then, if you have children and you're naming guardians for them, that too is a component of an estate plan where you are laying the groundwork in case something should happen to you. So, an estate plan protects you in two major scenarios. One is if you become disabled and you're unable to make either financial or healthcare decisions for yourself, or you're unable to raise your children, you're laying the groundwork to have someone step in to help you with those responsibilities if you're unable to carry them out. And then an estate plan is also there in case you die, and it determines where you want your assets to go. It determines or it specifies, how you would, if you die with minor children, who you would want to take care of those children, and so on down the line. So there are online services that can do estate plans. I would recommend that most people sit down with an attorney to actually get some level of customization, or you could kind of do a hybrid. You could do some sort of an online service as sort of a minimum standard where you're creating powers of attorney for healthcare and financial matters. But then you could also see an attorney and say, well, here's what we got through this online service. Does it help address the things that we have going on in our lives? So, good quality estate planning attorneys will help you customize the estate plan that you got through some sort of an online service. So it's not necessarily either or anymore. I understand that estate plans are expensive. So if you want to kind of go the hybrid route, I think that's a reasonable way to go too.
Yeah, it's always most people that get into having kids, it's an understanding that they have to do some of this planning just for happen chance that it's ends up being some point that they have other people be the beneficiary. And it's important to have those tools to navigate it just in case. And I always say, you never know what life will throw at you. So be prepared for everything. But yes, in that, so you're talking about kind of in this a little bit of health, and a couple of your interviews mentioned that about sustainable retirement factor and things that you wanted to do. What did you gain by understanding the value of investing in your health while you're thinking about retirement?
Yeah, it's something that you want to invest in well before retirement hits. In fact, I would say that that's a key takeaway from the book is just that you don't want to wait until you are on the doorstep of retirement before you start thinking through certainly the financial ramifications, but also building healthy habits in terms of your physical health and your mental health. It's ideal to start laying the groundwork for healthy habits well before you're in your 60s. So Michael Finca talks about that where he mentions that hiking is a hobby that he really enjoys, but in order to be able to really pursue that into retirement, he needs to get fit, stay fit well before that time. So healthy habits are really important. I discussed all different dimensions of healthcare and retirement with Carolyn McClanahan, who is a physician and she's also a financial planner, where we talked about the importance of finding healthcare providers. Ideally, you would find a doctor, a general care doctor who is well versed in working with older adults. She also points out the geographic location is pretty important in this context as well. That she's had experience with clients who happen to live in rural areas, and it just gets more difficult to get good quality healthcare. For one thing, there are fewer providers, fewer doctors who are working in some of those rural areas, so it can just be difficult to get the specialists that you need. So we discuss geographic locale, and then we discuss long-term care, which isn't technically health care, but nonetheless kind of falls under that umbrella, and that is care, custodial type care that people need if they're unable to carry out what are called activities of daily living. So you're unable to shower on your own, or you need help preparing meals, or you need help, getting out of bed, or whatever the case might be as you age. That's a type of care that can be incredibly costly because it's sort of outside of our traditional healthcare system, but nonetheless, it's worth having at least a plan in mind for how you'll address long-term care if you end up having a need for it. The tricky part of it, of course, is that roughly half of our population has a need for some type of paid long-term care and the other half doesn't. So it's really difficult to figure out. Obviously, you don't know in advance which camp you'll fall into. So it's a really tough planning problem. But she discusses some of the options for addressing it.
Yeah, I think health is, I give thanks for my health every day. So it's important, but also keeping yourself in the state of being, when people that I talk to are, conceptually thinking about retirement and they're like, I want to travel, I want to go to Europe. And I've been lucky enough to travel most of these places. And to be honest, I'm looking at my friends and colleagues going, yeah, if you go to France, as an example, they don't really have AC, and you have to lift your suitcase up about 5 or 6 stairwell cases with this bag of luggage that either you're going to have to take it from the airport to your location. Maybe you have finances for the elevator that is available at some hotels, but if you're Airbnb, that is a lot of weight to lift. So if you're not in the shape and hiking that I love too, like Michael Fink, that it is important because if you're backpacking or carrying a weight with you, you're elementing, like you need to have the precision about your knees and your joints to be able to like sustain that. And it is important for your longevity about, having a good concept in investing in your health first. But carrying on that idea, you already mentioned habits and then setting up habits. What is a good concept of implementing rather new or unusual habits for either retirement or the financial aspect of that?
So ideally, you would start well before retirement with healthy habits. I mentioned the importance of kind of looking forward and thinking about the kinds of things that you want to do. And so, in the realm of health, obviously, healthy diet, having an exercise program. I love the idea of people as they embark on retirement really being thoughtful about mapping out their days. Jamie Hopkins in the book talks about doing kind of a calendar exercise where you are looking at a week or a couple of weeks and you're actually mapping out what you plan to do on each day. And so ideally, you would build in some of those healthy habits into your calendar. And the same would go with your financial affairs. I happen to believe that being hands off is generally the better course of action for most people, where maybe they're doing just like a once yearly comprehensive portfolio checkup, but definitely less is more. But putting that on your calendar of just kind of that maybe December check in where you're looking at your portfolio, you're looking at tax planning, you're looking at charitable giving before year end, kind of bringing that together into one year-end sort of financial check-in, I think is a super healthy habit as well.
Yeah, I mean, both like habits are repetitive and they take what I've learned 90 days before they sink in a way, but changing, your life focus too soon to the retirement date is kind of harder to kind of split second change your things overnight. But that incremental growth in time that you're prospectively plotting your next course, most of the time they say people in business or in life always have like a 10-year plan, a 5-year plan, or like implementing tasks that you have the to do goals, but then dividing the goals into measurable, achievable goals inside of it helps to kind of facilitate the next part of your journey in life. But what was one of the best questions that you love to ask one of your interviews or all of them when you are, developing this book?
All the interviews were so different, so it's not the kind of thing where I really did come back to interviewees with the same question, because we tackled so many different topics. I was reading someone's review of the book, and he described it as a buffet. And I think that's a really nice way to describe it because it is a lot of disparate topics, but I hope that the, kind of tone hangs together. The goal is to provide kind of a lesson with each chapter, but the topics are also disparate, so I'm not sure that I did ask the same question of all of the interviewees. They were all pretty different.
Yeah, I think because you had a collection of what we'd say sometimes a short story, but it's segment by segment, which is a nice thing that it's a flip through. So if you want an answer to a specific topic, you can kind of go to the chapter and figure out what that interviewee and your questions are teaching you from that, that you don't need to go through the whole book in one reading. You can go back to it when you're in this journey of retirement planning, that you can pick up a chapter that you needed at the moment that you needed it to kind of dissect kind of the elements that you're looking for some advice. And so in that, like, what was the best kind of concept that you enjoyed from one of your interviews that you learned the most from? I mean, you've learned so much from this. It's a hard one to pinpoint, but the first one that comes to mind that you were like, I didn't know that and I need to do that maybe myself.
Well, so the last chapter of the book is an interview with Jordan Grummett, who is a hospice doctor. Actually, I was telling my husband about this book project, and I'm like, and I'm going to have Jordan Grummett be the last chapter. And he's like, really? A hospice doctor? Are you sure? But Jordan is one of the most positive and uplifting people I know. And one of the things we talk about, so he's been on this journey with many people when they're literally on their deathbeds, and he has spoken to them about what they regretted, what things they wanted to try to resolve before they pass away, and talks about this idea of purpose. And his new book, which is coming out, I think, in early 2025, is all about purpose. But his point is that there's a lot of purpose anxiety out there. And this is particularly acute for people who are embarking on retirement, where they think, okay, I've got this new chapter, I've got more time, I should do something really big. And so, they might think I should write a book or I should start a foundation or something really bold and audacious. And his point is that that gives people a sense of panic a little bit because they're like, I'm not sure I've got the right purpose. And so he makes this really reassuring point that we're, we should be okay with what he calls small p purpose. And basically, that's, maybe it's the hobby that you loved as a kid that you had to kind of set aside because you got busy with other activities. Or maybe it's just being a wonderful grandparent or a wonderful partner to your spouse, or that you're super committed to hiking or whatever. Like nothing really bold and audacious, but just something that, like, yes, this is a thing that I'm about, and this helps define me, and this is something that gives me a sense of that I'm making an impact. It's helping me make sense of the world around me. And so I feel like, and Jordan puts it much more eloquently than I am here, but I feel like it's a very reassuring point. Like, even if you don't have that big P purpose that he calls it, it's okay if you've got some of these little P purposes, and we all do. So I love that lesson, and I hope people will take some comfort from it as they think about their own retirements.
Yeah, I think that's two things that you spoke about there. One was the idea of regrets. That is most people on the ending of the journey, so to speak, that regrets is a plethora of missing points that you should have done something else. And so I always look at it, try it, don't have regrets, at least you tried. But the also understanding is that purpose is a very valuable tool, especially when you're going into a new retirement. You have to find your purpose in a new idea that is not your like consistent purpose that you've had before. But tiny things are the most important things, and they make huge ways where whether or not you're aware of it or not, it's still your impact of your time that you're appreciating the smaller things. Because when you slow down more, in my realization of experience that I've had to have that moment that I had to slow everything down. We had it kind of during the pandemic. The little tiny things are priceless,
Mm.
but it's your viewpoint that you kind of need to redirect in a different way. But it is a very valuable idea to kind of think about, purpose in different life phases. That I believe you touched on a couple things like mental decline
Mm.
and health as well as part of that journey, but still wanting to be valid because you spoke about, like, couples making decisions about moving from their place to another place, but also retirement homes was part of that for that socialization factor and not feeling isolated and alone, which is another one that you kind of touched upon. Do you want to expand a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. Michael Finca points out that people who are in single family homes tend to be kind of happier through maybe the early 70s or some period like that. I can't remember the specific age band, but actually, they find later in life people who are living in some type of community setting, either in a condo building or in some sort of an independent living community, they tend to be happier. And that, he conjectures, is because that living situation just puts you in more contact with other human beings, which it turns out is really good for your brain as you age, that there's so much that's going on when you're interacting with other people. You've been doing it so long that you don't pay attention to how good it is for your brain and how your brain is working, but you're listening to someone, you're putting things into your memory. There's a lot that's going on in the course of you having a conversation with someone, and it turns out that's really good for people. So, it doesn't mean that if you choose to age in place that you're definitely going to have cognitive decline or be less happy, but it does suggest that if that is your plan, if your plan is to stay in your home, you also need to put yourself in a situation where you will run into other human beings.
Mm,
Whether it's going to the gym several times a week or playing pickleball or whatever it is, or
mhm.
doing some volunteer activity where you're working with other people, you need to put in place a structure that will give you that contact to other human beings, because that is very much intertwined with happiness and also good cognitive health.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to know and value your friends and your time spent with them and how you grow and evolve together, but also conversations in those moments are very valuable. It's, for me, priceless to have that idea of sitting down with someone that I loved or friends that I have or meeting new people because I'm acquisitive like that. And I think it's a great like exercise to figure out, what questions you can ask, what you can learn, what you can grow to bond together and then experience the journey if you're on the same timeline or different ones to keep you relevant and still in play, that maybe the younger generations are doing things that you've never heard of because we seem like technologically we're evolving so fast. Most
Right.
to keep up. But thank you very much, Christine. I want to ask you two more questions. One is, what is the best advice you've ever received in your life journey?
Well, it was from my mom. So I'm from a big family and was the youngest of a big family. I have a sister with an intellectual disability. So one thing my mom always said was people are not thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are. She'd say, you are lucky if you get like 30 seconds of their thoughts. And for me, that was just, sort of like, really? What? But it's actually very freeing to just assume that people are not fretting about like what you have on or whatever. It's just kind of, I think, helpful to not be sort of burdened by this sense that everyone's watching, everyone's paying attention. Do what you want to do. And people probably not think very much about it. And even if you screw something up, people probably, will hardly give it a thought as well. So to me, that's just been kind of great life advice. It's helped keep me sane through a lot of things.
Yeah, I like your mom. I mean, I say something similar in a way that it's like people are too wrapped up in their own thoughts about them. So it's, do you have space in their mind, maybe depending on how close they know you or how much you're bonded to them? But for the relative concept, you would spend more time critiquing yourself about what everybody else is thinking when they're not even spending that much time. Doesn't mean that you're not a valuable person and you have a really good idea and you're not worthy of so much, but sometimes it is a good idea that just be you because there's only one of you. So,
Exactly. That's
yeah.
that's exactly it.
So, what is the best lesson you've ever learned from and what you took away from that moment that you've used going forward?
So one thing, I don't know that it's like the best lesson, but one thing that I think a lot about is just approaching new topics with a sense of don't worry about looking stupid. Like, ask all of your stupid, in quotes, questions and don't feel uncomfortable about that because chances are other people have similar questions. So, that has really helped me be an advocate, I would say, for people as they are investigating their financial matters, like being willing to just sort of say, wait, why do we do it this way? And ask all those questions so that I understand it myself and also, a certain amount of the work that we do at Morningstar is kind of advocacy on behalf of investors. And so kind of putting ourselves on the outside of the industry and asking questions about, well, why is this sort of the standard practice in the industry? Is that necessarily the way we should be doing it? That's just been really helpful for me to comfortable asking questions about why things are as they are. It's been sort of a good navigational tool as I've progressed in my career.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's important for ideas of understanding the fact that it is true that you need to understand there is no stupid questions. But the only ones that I think that are stupid questions are the ones that you forgot to ask when you had that moment to ask it. Because most people are thinking about that question that they would want to ask, but they don't have the courage to try. But that is the courage that you've geared for, that you're prepared to ask those questions. And especially for finances, anything for that, you would want to know more than know less. Well,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. I
Thank
call
you.
the industry the financial complexity complex. Like they
Ah,
really like to make things complicated and it doesn't have to be complicated. And you just need to ask all your questions if you are a consumer attempting to sort this stuff out. And if someone's kind of making you feel dumb about those questions, then go somewhere else.
Yes, absolutely. If you feel it in your gut that it's not the right resource and they're not listening to you, it's probably not the right financial person for you. And it will
Exactly.
make it trust yourself better, which is important to understand, especially when it comes to people trusting them with your money. So you would
Exactly.
want people to be advocates for listening and answering those questions, because if they don't know, it's probably not the right person.
Right.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Chrissy Benz. I'm excited about your new book, How to Retire, and the 20 lessons for a happy, successful, and wealthy retirement. You can find all the links in the bio and check her out at the Morningstar and Morningstar.com, where she is a senior columnist. And also, she has her own podcast called The Long View that's available. Thank you very much, Chrissy, for your time.
Thank you so much, Jasmine.
Thank you for tuning in to the Tranquility Magazine podcast. Please subscribe and add your questions to our Q&A. We want to give a thank you to our team for their effort in creating every episode and our content at tranquilitymagazine.com.